This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me, Sarah Raven, and various different guests. And we have these threads now running through the podcast, some with Arthur Parkinson, who you know, some with Jemima Bowker, who is she's in her early 30s. She's what we call our beginner gardener and our balcony gardener. And Jemima used to she the cat. Hello, by the way, Jemima.
Hello.
Good morning.
Nice to be here. Hi.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks. I'm very well.
Now I'm going to explain who you are. So some of you will have heard Jemima on the podcast before because she's done a couple now. So she started working with me here at Perch Hill probably 4 years ago now. And she started as an intern working in the garden. And then I poached her to come inside and run the school. So she then became our event organizer. And the brilliant thing about that is that she could run the events in the main season, but it meant that she then returned to the garden in the winter, partially anyway. So Josie was overjoyed because we're always shorthanded in the garden, and it made it a bit more interesting for Jemima. Anyway, now she works for our big sister company, Sarah Raven, and she is experimenting and trialling with being a balcony gardener, which of course at Perch Hill, in my rolling acres, I'm very, very privileged to have, and I have a big garden, and it's really difficult for people who have no space in a way to feel how it's relevant to them. And it is, because of course plants are plants and good plants are good plants, and learning is something that is life expanding and fantastic. And Jemima is the perfect example. So this episode is going to be very much about Jemima's own space. And so, Mimes, as I call her, will you tell me about your space and describe it a little bit?
So I'm in a very small little flat in a mansion block flat in Barnes. And I have a balcony out the front, which is northeast facing, and I have a balcony out the back, which is southwest facing, and they are both quite tiny, and so I have to kind of manage expectations of what I can really fit out there. And this summer I've just kind of we only moved in March, so I've just kind of been filling it out with typically actually things that I've kind of begged, borrowed and stolen. I've grabbed a few things as I nip down to Perch Hill that Josie's got going spare, the odd cuttings here and there, and so it's a bit of a kind of hodgepodge, but it's quite a good kind of learning hodgepodge, because at this stage I'm not too fussed about creating the most perfectly aesthetic little corner, because I just want to like play around with things and see how they grow. And I think now I know the space that I'm gardening or growing in very small. As I go into next year, I kind of want to like plan it a bit more and actually think, okay, well, this spot I've got this and this spot I've got this, which is, I can draw inspiration so much from the little corners of Perch Hill and areas like the Dutch Yard and so on. So, yeah, I've got out the back in the sunnier spot, I've got quite a few pelargoniums, which were cuttings taken from autumn last year. And they actually are doing really well. But the one thing that I'm finding is a bit of a nightmare with them is they are constantly covered in aphids. And I have to kind of shoot them off with, I like bring them in because I don't have a tap outside. So I kind of try and run them under the kitchen sink to kind of blast as many of them off as possible. But I don't know, is there anything else that I can do to prevent that, and what's causing that? And yeah, it's very frustrating.
Yeah, I do think blasting is really, really good. And we had lupin aphid this year, and we were all sort of slightly downcast and sort of thought, oh no, that'll be the end of the lupins. But we jetted them really strongly with a strong hose and with a fitting on the end, making it really quite a strong jet. And really, genuinely, it worked. They fell to the ground, the birds ate them, and they didn't come back. And that, to me, was triumphant. But anyway, if that doesn't work for you, you can use something like a fairy liquid put into a water atomizer, and that apparently works by osmosis, which is it goes into the body of the aphid, and I'm afraid in a rather macabre way, it then I think bursts it with the liquid. And so that is quite a very safe, sort of organic, if not very nice for the aphid way of getting rid of them. And so you can try that.
Will it work with Ecover as well as fairy liquid?
Yes, it will work with Ecover.
Anything. Okay.
You can use a nice gentle Ecover.
Yeah.
So that would be the next thing to try. And the other thing is to prevent it. What I would say is the aromatic pelargoniums seem to have better pest resistance to the non-aromatics. So in fact, Arthur Parkinson discovered this because he uses them as houseplants in the winter. Well, they're out in the garden in the summer and autumn. And then when the frosts come, he brings them in. And he found the ones like Lord Bute and Pseudoides, which are not scented, got really bad aphid. But he found Attar of Roses, Sweet Mimosa, and Prince of Orange, which are very fragrant. They must have an essential oil in them, of course, to give them the fragrance. And rather like with lavender, they seem to be quite repellent to aphid attack. They seem to resist. But that would be the other thing. And then if you could get, it sounds rather extravagant, but a little bit of lavender oil in an atomizer, again, exactly the same thing. So you could douse your ones, if they're not aromatic, with something that is aromatic. And lavender is incredibly good as prevention. Or even mint essence. You could make yourself a really strong mint tea and try that too.
Do you know what? The ones I have, and maybe I'm just unlucky, but I've got Attar of Roses and Prince of Orange.
Have you? And they're still bad.
And they're quite bad, yeah. But it's kind of manageable because when I spray them, it does the job, and then a month later, maybe I just need to come back at them again. And they're all quite small, so it doesn't take a long time. But I might try the Ecover trick and see what happens, and also just experiment with throwing some different varieties. I wonder if it's the lack of breeze or...
So that's the next thing I was coming on to is air circulation. That's what I find. If we cram lots of anything, but pelargoniums particularly, really closely together in the greenhouse, where there is very bad air circulation, we definitely get a build-up of a sort of nugget, a nucleus of aphids or pests, and then they form this, community, and then they spread. And so making sure that you spread things out well, and in a way, even pruning them a bit so that you get good air circulation between the branches and between the leaves will really, really help. So doing a little bit of defoliating, don't worry about that. It'll grow back, and they'll grow back fresh and green. But so just being aware that it's that double thing. So try and use the Ecover and or possibly an essential oil to repel them. So that Ecover is for treatment, and then use a repellent with perhaps an essential oil, and then really picking over them and making sure where you put them, but also the plant itself has good air circulation.
Yeah.
And I remember a really good pruner of fruit trees told me, and this is a well-known sort of rural legend, so to speak, which is when you prune your fruit trees in the autumn, make sure you prune them so that a pigeon could fly through without hitting leaves. And that works in a mini. So if you're just thinking of like a hummingbird or a moth flying through your pelargonium, is there enough air for it to do so, if you see what I mean, or is it too congested? And it's that sort of vision that you need to have.
Yeah, that reminds me of, I remember someone talking about when you're doing an arrangement of making sure that you've got space for a butterfly to kind of fly through and just give it some space. So yeah, I'll definitely give that a whirl. And because I'm desperate to make them a success, because I want them in my house in the winter, like Arthur, because, that just makes it so much more joyful inside as well. So if I can crack that, I'll be thrilled. And then I've got my biggest pot, which is still not that big. And that's the thing I really need to do, is I need to invest in some big pots, because what I'm figuring out, which I kind of knew already, but it's easier to buy lots of small pots because obviously they're less expensive, and you think that they're lower maintenance, and they're not at all because they need much more watering and all of that. So I'm desperate to get some bigger pots as we go into autumn and plant up some kind of bumper bulb collections and so on. But in one of my pots, I've got some Geum that I bought from the Chelsea Flower Show, actually. That was the one thing that I treated myself to. It was a Tempest red, but it's kind of orangey.
Oh, yes, and it's beautiful, yes.
It's really lovely. And I've got that in a pot with the Salvia Jemima's Gem, which is indeed very lovely, which I think was trialled at Perch Hill, and Josie gave me one. And that is like hot pink with the Geum, which is still flowering. I cut it before I went away on holiday because I went away for 2 weeks, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, all my pots are going to absolutely, be gone. And I chopped everything right back. I cut down all the Geums, and I cut back basically the Salvias as well, where the flower heads were looking a bit sad. And I came back and they were just shooting up new buds, and the Geums are still going strong. So I think they've been amazing. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with them in the pot once it comes to kind of planting up some bulbs in there, because will it die back completely, Geum, or will the foliage stay green? I don't want to just put it into another pot over winter.
No, they are herbaceous, so they will die back. But you can take them out and just put them on the side, put your bulb lasagna in below, and then pop the Geum back. So, depending on the size of the pot, that will work fine. And then the Geum's foliage will be a nice backdrop to your bulb lasagna that you're then going to put in the autumn. But maybe we'll do another episode on balcony bulb lasagnas, just because we can't pack in too much information. So that will be watch this space, and we'll do that another time. And so you've got salvias, you've got pelargoniums on the hot, sunny side. And then what have you got on the north-facing side?
On the north-facing side, I've got a Plectranthus, which is that? Did I say that right?
Plectranthus.
Plectranthus, which I think is just so beautiful. It's in a pot that is far too small, I think, for it, because it's about 35 centimetre pot. So it's looking really fabulous right now. But I picked it up the other day to check kind of whether I needed to water it, which I find is a really helpful tip that you and Josie said about kind of lifting up your pots to see if they need water rather than just automatically watering. And it's root that coming out the bottom of the pot is so many roots. It just looks like it's ready to be upsized. So I need to get some bigger pots. But I mean, what's the ultimate size that will grow to? Because what size kind of pots do you grow them in at Perch Hill? I know they're quite often planted in big troughs amongst, lots of other shade loving things, but if you've just got it on its own, how big do I need to go?
It's a tender perennial from New Zealand for dry shade, Plectranthus ciliatus. It's got, as you know, a dark green leaf with purple veins through it and a purple underside to the leaf. And it's evergreen, but it's tender. So if you can overwinter it by bringing it inside and putting it on a shady north-facing window ledge, you will then gradually build up a decent-sized plant. So ours are whoppers. And so, ours are in, 50 centimetre diameter pots in the shade here, and really spectacular, or 45 centimetres anyway. But that's because we've overwintered them from one year to the next. So we'll bring them in once the frosts are forecast, which in London, of course, where you are, is really late in the year, and you may almost not get them. But I would still bring them in, put them, I would say mid-November, early December, bring them in. And then you do tend to have frosts a bit later in London. I mean, not later than here, but surprisingly late. So be careful, don't put them out until the middle of April, I would say. And then that will have grown to a more sizable thing. So at that point, pot it on. But in one season, it's still pretty vigorous. It's still pretty quick growing, as you found. So I would say ideally a sort of 40 centimetre by 40 centimetre size pot. So it's not a small thing, or maybe 35 by 35. So it's got to be as deep as it is wide, really, because it's got such strong, vigorous roots. Otherwise, it'll start to break out of its pot, as you found.
Yeah, I really love it. I think it's so kind of ornamental. And if I can have a few things that are just quite big and impactful out there, it's just easy care for me, because although I want to spend time out there, I'm also busy, and it's just nice to have things that are just reliably going to be there looking fabulous. So yeah, I've got that, and I've got a couple of other pots with some gaura. It does get quite a lot of sun during the day, so it's not like completely. It gets sun first thing, and then it kind of loses it maybe by 2 or 3 p.m. And I've got it on the far. I've got a table with pots on it, and I've got that on the far corner, which I can see out my window, but it kind of is in the sunniest spot. I've got some Gaura, which I love. I'm not really too sure if you're meant to deadhead that or if you're meant to just kind of let it keep going. I just kind of run my fingers along along the stems, just if there's any kind of dead flowers. But I think that's so beautiful and graceful. And actually, sitting behind the quite chunky Plectranthus, I really like it. And I've got a Pelargonium tomentosum as well, which I feel like I read different things. And Arthur and I were chatting about this at Chelsea because he was saying how he always thought that it was meant to be in the shade. So he was keeping his, in his loo in the winter, and it was just looking so sad. And then someone else said, no, it needs full sun. So I wasn't sure. So I've put it kind of in the middle ground, and it seems to be doing okay.
Well, the point is it likes both. But what's exceptional about it is that Pelargonium tomentosum and actually one of its hybrids, which we have here, which is a hybrid, it's crossbred with the butterfly flowered Pelargonium called Papilliflora, and they both will take shade. And that is very unusual for a Pelargonium because, of course, they're from South Africa. You'll see them all over Table Mountain growing wild. They're from arid environments. But some of them have adapted or have evolved or whatever to grow happily in shade. And tomentosum we have in a big container here on the north face of the barn where it's really shady, perfectly happy. And then I bring them in the winter. And in the winter, I have to say, I do put them in the sunny French windows here so they get a bit more light. But they will put up with shade in the garden for sure.
And they're so glam, aren't they? Because they've got that kind of huge velvety looking kind of leaves that's like velvet ribbon. And I think, I'm trying to build them up so that I can have them inside as well over winter. So that's kind of what I've got going on. And I've just finally I didn't have a watering can. I was filling up jugs from my kitchen sink. It's just not something that I had when we moved house, because at my old house one came with the shed, and here I didn't have one. So I finally invested in a watering can, and I've started feeding because I just think they were all beginning to look a little bit sad. So I just I've got some liquid seaweed feed, which I'm just doing every other Friday, and then if I need to ramp it up more, I will. But I mean, the telltale signs that everything is needing a bit of a feed, the kind of yellowing around the edges, and what else? And how do you know if you're overfeeding? That was something I wanted to ask you about, because can you feed too much?
Yes. So telltale sign is you get rather acid greeny leaves, and they will be new leaves, and that's fine. But what you don't want to do is by feeding, to draw the root system up to the top of the pot. And that's what we found with seaweed and any liquid fertilizer, actually. Of course, it doesn't permeate down very far. So 2 tips, really. Do stick to the concentration it recommends on the back of the bottle. And I'm forever greedy, so I'm always for sort of, if I double it, it'll grow twice as fast. It doesn't. It really messes with it because the roots will be drawn up towards the feed. So 1, do it at the right concentration, and only right at the end of the season, if you want to prolong things because you've got a party on your balcony in October, would you perhaps double it. But also, I would recommend feeding from the top every 2 weeks, like you're saying, but also maybe every 3rd time, so every 6 weeks, feed from the bottom. So actually put some seaweed liquid seaweed into a bowl or like a tray and allow it to suck it up from the base. So don't always top feed. So you're actually feeding the roots as well as the leaves. But of course, these are foliar feeds, so they're absorbed through the leaves as well as through the roots. And that's the good thing about a liquid seaweed fertilizer, is it is a foliar feed, so it will be absorbed at the top. But just every so often, or maybe just, every other time you feed, just put a little bit in the tray in the base, because that will also help to feed the roots.
I guess it would be helpful to just say that the reason why I guess you start feeding like as we go further through the summer is because the compost that you pot on with originally has this kind of certain amount of kind of feed and food within it, which keeps the plant going for, say, 6 weeks or so.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then from then on, you need to start feeding it regularly to prolong it, because it's just kind of run out of steam. And I think especially so if you've been watering lots, because that flushes out a lot of the feed that's within the compost. So, I mean, I haven't had to water so much because it's not been really hot and really dry, but it's definitely, I'm still having to water quite regularly. So yeah, I'm glad I've finally bitten the bullet on that. So I will try the bottom feeding as well. That sounds like a really good idea.
Yeah. So just to, again, to take us further into your own situation. So you've got your sunny balcony, you've got your shady balcony, but I know you're also beginning to negotiate to get a little bit of outside space in your communal garden. And I think a lot of people live in that situation. They're in the city and maybe if they're lucky, they have window ledges and a balcony. But if they're even luckier, perhaps they are allowed to use some public space. And I know with you do have access to a little bit of outside space.
Yes, I do. And it's a really lovely little garden out the back. So there's seven flats that share it. And my steps at the back go down and you go out into this garden, which is kind of southwest facing, but it has got a huge tall wall at the far end. So okay. Yes, it gets sun in the middle of the day, but it loses it quite quickly as well, which is a bit of a shame because it is, it's almost the wall that we look out on is higher than the wall of our building. So it's quite a tall sun blocker, which is a bit of a shame. But one of my neighbours who lives on the ground floor, she kind of does the garden herself. And I was chatting to her the other day. I think she maybe saw my Sarah Raymond delivery box and we got chatting and she said, oh my gosh, well that's, I do it all on my own at the moment. So I was like, great, I'll get involved and I'll help and we can do it together because I think she feels it's a bit of a burden. And it's a really nice garden, and it's a lot of perennials. So it's a lot of stuff that keeps coming back year after year. There's some really beautiful roses down there. There's a fig tree. There's a lot of geraniums, and yeah, and then there's a kind of shady corner where there's some acanthus, but the beds look very kind of full, and I think there's a lot that just gets completely overgrown, and by the end of the summer, it's like a bit of a maze. So just because no one has the time to look after it properly. And I guess going into autumn, one of the things that I was thinking about was I don't know when I don't know what the soil is like. So I need to go and have a play with that because one of the important things, if you're kind of thinking, okay, I want to sort out my garden, is what's my soil like? Is it really heavy clay where it's kind of, if you feel it between your fingers, it's kind of quite sticky, or is it really sandy and drains really easily? So I don't know what typically London soil is. You might know better than me.
Well,
okay.
It's mixed, but a lot of it is clay, and that's why all the bricks are made from those lovely London stock bricks. And so you're allowed to get stuck in. And have you suggested mulching?
So I asked her. I said, when did you have you mulched? But we've got literally I guess mulching is basically putting a layer of really lovely nutrient dense organic matter on top of the beds, which will just help with the soil structure and making it more fertile, which just makes it a nicer place for plants to grow. And so I asked, but we've got a very small side return which I can just wheel my bike through, and then you kind of have to wade through all the bike racks and stuff to get to it. So even getting a wheelbarrow down there would be quite tough, but I think you could. But I don't know where to get, you have a lovely herd of cows with, lots of muck. So I don't know where to suggest getting mulch from, what to go for, what's, the easiest and lightest thing to do. I don't know, would you have any suggestions?
Green waste. I would ring the local council, and all our local councils have to compost all our kitchen waste. And those little mini dustbins that you all get in cities, which are for your kitchen waste. And they all go into either a biodigester or a composting system of some description, and out comes really fantastic organic matter. And the reason it's normally pretty fantastic is it's been done at a sufficient heat that it's killed the weed seed in it. And so you actually get this very pristine organic matter that won't spread more weeds. It'll suppress the weeds, and it'll help with moisture retention in the soil. So it's not just that it helps with the nutrient content of the soil, it helps like a sponge of holding on water. So it will really, really help with general plant health, and it'll help with worm life. There are so many things, the microbiomes, not microbiome, that's us, mycorrhizes,
Yes.
So generally you'll build up a healthier environment. And the more you can mulch in the autumn and then again in the spring, I mean, obviously in a community garden or a communal garden like you're in, it's a question of who pays for it.
Who pays for it.
And, whether you could go around the flats and say to everyone, would they be able to give a tenner? But it's not expensive.
Fund.
Yeah, a mulch fund. It's not expensive stuff. And also whether they would be able to give you half an hour on a Saturday where you will just spread it. You'll become great friends with all your neighbours. So it's a good community thing to do. But I know in a rented place where, you're in a shared space, these things are obviously difficult and perhaps not everyone will want to do it, but maybe a few more people will want to do it. And then in terms of enhancing plant, you're completely right. Don't get stuck in until you see exactly what's there all the way through the year. And then mulching is a really good sort of kind of treading water measure that will make everything happier that's there. And have you got perennial weeds or things going through the beds? Or
I think probably quite a few. I've actually not looked in some areas that closely, but okay. I think there's a bit of bindweed going on definitely at the back. So I know that's a big and that's just not something that collectively as a group that's going to get sorted. But if we can have certain areas that are really lovely, then I think that would just be to focus on some bits. And with just going back to the mulch one, just really quickly, I feel like that's the kind of thing that's like, oh gosh, what a faff! Like that's heavy lifting. It's a lot of effort. Like, is it worth it? Yes, is the answer to that, because it's just going to
definitely yes.
Yeah. I know that's the answer, but I think it's what people don't want to hear because they think, oh no, do I really have to do that? That seems like such hard work. Can I not just do all of the nice stuff? But that heavy lifting early on is so worthwhile, and I learned that at Perch Hill as I carried many wheelbarrows of muck through the garden in kind of spring and autumn. But it makes life throughout the season much easier, I guess, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's only twice a year, and persuade everyone that it's much healthier than going to the gym. Anyway,
yeah, exactly.
It's very lovely to touch base on this, and we will revisit the balcony garden with Jemima on a regular basis through the podcast, and sort of what jobs are coming up in the next few weeks or months, so that those of you who have tiny space, or, that's what you want. I mean, a flower yard situation, a doorstep will be attending to the questions and demands. And do send questions, of course. Jemima and I are really happy to have a slot where we answer questions.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing that I think to do right now, which is what I'm noticing is when I'm just wandering around, even just the kind of streets where I am, is just seeing things that are looking totally amazing. Like I've got lots of neighbours on my street who are growing, there's someone that's got some Verbena bonariensis, the lovely tall purple Verbena, and I'm seeing lots of things and I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe if that's working there, then it will probably work on my balcony. And seeing certain things that are looking really amazing right now, like so many people's gardens are like covered in that beautiful, fragrant Tracheospernum jasminoides. So you see that everywhere and you see it growing in shady corners and you think, okay, well, maybe I can make that work. And I just think looking around you and seeing what your neighbours are growing, and most likely, you could probably, it would fare quite well in your garden as well. So it's a good time to just take a look around when you go for a walk.
Really good tip. Take a picture on your phone once a month of the things. Just walk down the street, the things that are doing well locally. And then it'll be a reminder when you're coming to plan in the winter months and thinking about 2025. Thanks, Mimes.
Thank you very much. Nice to chat.
See you soon. Thanks very much for listening to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange with me, Sarah Raven, and Jemima Bowker. Next week, I'm joined by an amazing young man called Ed Morrison, who is one of the founders of this fantastic new organisation, Roots Allotments, which are basically creating growing spaces throughout the UK, which are kind of a cooperative organisation, not council-led, but he and his business partners, Will and Christian, have set up this amazing movement, which is really gathering momentum and gathering speed to get us all growing our own and help us not worry about food security and the fact that we import all our food, because we're going to grow our own. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.